The first snow of winter arrived early that year, blanketing the Blackwood Ranch in pristine white by mid-November. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching Jake and his men move cattle to sheltered areas closer to the barn. The work was harder in winter, and the days were shorter, but there was something beautiful about the ranch covered in snow. 6 months had passed since Sarah's arrival, and her life had settled into a rhythm she had never experienced before. The work was steady and satisfying, Jake treated her with respect and kindness, and she had finally found the stability she had been searching for her entire life. But, lately, something had been troubling Jake, and Sarah couldn't figure out what it was. He had been quiet and distracted for the past few weeks. Their morning conversations were shorter, and he often seemed lost in thought during dinner. Sarah wondered if it had something to do with Victoria Hamilton, who had made 2 more visits to the ranch since that first day in October. Each time, Victoria had been charming and persistent, making it clear that she was interested in renewing her relationship with Jake. The kitchen door opened, bringing a gust of cold air and Jake himself, stamping snow off his boots. His cheeks were red from the cold, and snowflakes clung to his dark hair under his cowboy hat. "BRR," he said, pulling off his gloves. "It's getting nasty out there. I sent the boys home early. No point in having them freeze for work that can wait until tomorrow." Sarah poured him a cup of hot coffee and handed it to him. "Good call. You look half frozen yourself. Why don't you warm up while I finish dinner?" Jake wrapped his hands around the mug and watched Sarah move around the kitchen. She was making his favorite meal, pot roast with vegetables and fresh bread. The smell filled the house with warmth and comfort. He had been thinking a lot lately about how much Sarah had changed his life, and not just because she kept his house clean and cooked amazing meals. Sarah had brought something to the ranch that had been missing since his grandfather died, a sense of home and belonging. When he came in from long, hard days of work, she was there with a smile and genuine interest in how his day had gone. She remembered the things that were important to him, anticipated his needs, and made his life easier in countless small ways. But, more than that, Jake had come to realize that he was falling in love with her. The realization had hit him gradually over the past few months, but now it was undeniable. He looked forward to seeing her face every morning, enjoyed their conversations more than anything else in his day, and found himself thinking about her even when he was supposed to be focused on ranch work. The problem was, he didn't know how Sarah felt about him. She was always professional and friendly, but he couldn't tell if her kindness toward him was just part of her job or something more personal. And even if she did have feelings for him, would it be fair to pursue a relationship with his employee? The power dynamic made everything complicated. There was another problem too, one that had been weighing on his mind more and more heavily. Jake had never told Sarah the real reason he needed a housekeeper so urgently, and he was running out of time to explain the situation to her. "Sarah," he said, setting down his coffee cup. "Can we talk? There's something I need to tell you." Sarah looked up from the stove, immediately alert to the serious tone in his voice. "Of course. Is everything okay?" Jake gestured toward the kitchen table. "Let's sit down. This might take a while." They settled across from each other at the table, and Jake ran his hand through his hair, that familiar gesture that meant he was nervous or uncomfortable. "Do you remember when we first met, and I told you that this ranch has been in my family for 3 generations? Sarah nodded. "Your great-grandfather started it." "Right. Well, when my grandfather died 2 years ago, he left me the ranch in his will. But there was a condition attached to the inheritance that I didn't mention before." Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach. "What kind of condition?" Jake took a deep breath. "The will states that in order to inherit the ranch permanently, I have to be married within 3 years of my grandfather's death. If I'm not married by the deadline, the ranch gets sold and the money goes to charity." Sarah stared at him in shock. "Married? But why would your grandfather put a condition like that in his will?" "Because he believed that a ranch needed a family to make it complete," Jake said. "He used to tell me that this place was meant to be filled with children and laughter, not just one lonely bachelor. He wanted to make sure I wouldn't end up spending my whole life alone." "When is the deadline?" Sarah asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. January 15th, Jake said quietly. 2 months from now. Sarah felt like the world had tilted sideways. 2 months? Jake, that's not very much time. I know, Jake said miserably. I've been trying to figure out what to do for the past 2 years. At first, I thought maybe Victoria and I could work things out. That's part of why I didn't discourage her visits. But every time I see her, I'm reminded of how wrong we are for each other. Sarah's mind was racing. Have you considered just getting married for the sake of keeping the ranch? I mean, a marriage in name only, just to meet the legal requirement? Jake looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. I've thought about it. But that seems like a pretty terrible way to start a marriage, don't you think? Besides, my grandfather was smart. The will specifies that it has to be a real marriage, not just a legal arrangement. If I got divorced within the first year, the ranch would still be sold. They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in thought. Sarah couldn't believe that Jake might lose everything his family had built just because of an arbitrary deadline in a will. Maybe you could contest the will, she suggested. It seems unreasonable to put such a condition on someone's inheritance. Jake shook his head. I already looked into that with Mr. Peterson. The will is ironclad. My grandfather was very specific about what he wanted. Then, what are you going to do? Sarah asked. Jake looked directly at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart skip a beat. Actually, I was hoping you might help me with that. Me? How could I help? Jake stood up and began pacing around the kitchen. Sarah, these past 6 months have been the best of my life. You've made this house a home, made my life better in every possible way. I've come to care about you more than I ever thought possible. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. Jake. He stopped pacing and faced her. I know this is crazy, and I know it's not the most romantic proposal in the world, but... Sarah, would you consider marrying me? Sarah stared at him in shock. Of all the things she had imagined he might say, a marriage proposal had not been one of them. I don't understand, she said weakly. Are you asking me to marry you just to help you keep the ranch? Jake sat back down across from her and reached for her hands. No, Sarah. I'm asking you to marry me because I love you. I've been falling in love with you for months, but I didn't know how to tell you. The deadline just forced me to speak up sooner than I might have otherwise. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. You love me? I love you, Jake said firmly. I love your strength and your kindness and your determination. I love the way you make me laugh and the way you take care of everyone around you. I love coming home to you every day, and I can't imagine my life without you in it. But I'm just your housekeeper, Sarah protested. I'm nobody special. I don't have education or money or connections. I grew up in foster care, Jake. I don't know anything about being a rancher's wife. Jake squeezed her hands. Sarah, you are the most special person I've ever known. You've overcome more challenges than most people face in a lifetime, and you've done it with grace and dignity. You've already proven that you can handle life on a ranch. And, as for being a rancher's wife, all that requires is loving the rancher. Sarah felt a tear roll down her cheek. Do you really mean that? I've never meant anything more in my life, Jake said. Sarah, I know this is sudden, and I know the timing is complicated because of the deadline. If you need time to think about it, I understand. But I want you to know that my feelings for you have nothing to do with the ranch. Even if there was no deadline, I would still want to spend my life with you. Sarah looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and love. She thought about how happy she had been for the past 6 months, how much she had come to love this place and this man. She thought about all the lonely years before she came to the ranch, and how Jake had given her something she had never had before, a real home and someone who truly cared about her. I love you too, she said softly. I've been trying not to admit it to myself because I didn't think someone like you could ever feel that way about someone like me. Jake moved around the table and pulled her into his arms. Someone like me is incredibly lucky to have someone like you love him back. He kissed her then, gently at first and, then, with growing passion. Sarah felt like her heart might burst with happiness. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Is that a yes?" Jake asked, his forehead resting against hers. Sarah laughed through her tears. "Yes, Jake Blackwood. I'll marry you." Jake spun her around the kitchen, both of them laughing with joy. When he set her down, Sarah suddenly thought of something. What about Victoria? She's not going to be happy about this. Jake's expression grew serious. Victoria will have to accept it. This is my life and my choice. She had her chance years ago, and she made it clear that the ranch life wasn't what she wanted. She might cause trouble, Sarah warned. Let her try, Jake said firmly. I'm not going to let anyone come between us, Sarah. What we have is too important. They spent the evening making plans. They would have a small ceremony at the ranch with just a few friends and family members as witnesses. Mr. Peterson would handle the legal aspects to make sure everything was properly documented for the inheritance requirements. They decided to wait until after Christmas to give themselves time to plan properly. The next few weeks passed in a blur of wedding preparations and regular ranch work. Sarah had never planned a wedding before, but she found herself enjoying the process with Jake's help. They kept the guest list small, just Jake's ranch hands, Mr. Peterson and his wife, and a few other close friends from town. Sarah bought a simple but elegant white dress from a shop in town, and Jake arranged for the local minister to perform the ceremony in the ranch house living room. They decided to have the reception right there as well, with Sarah cooking the meal herself because she wanted everything to be personal and meaningful. Victoria Hamilton made one more visit to the ranch during this time, showing up unannounced on a cold December afternoon. Sarah answered the door and was not surprised to see the beautiful blonde woman standing there with an expression that was far from friendly. I need to speak with Jake, Victoria said without preamble. He's in the barn, Sarah replied calmly. I'll get him for you. Don't bother, Victoria said, pushing past Sarah into the house. I heard the most ridiculous rumor in town today. Someone told me that Jake is getting married. To you. Sarah straightened her shoulders. It's not a rumor. Jake and I are getting married on December 30th. Victoria's perfectly made-up face contorted with disbelief and anger. This is insane, Sarah. You can't possibly think this will work. Jake needs a wife who can match his social standing, someone who can help him build connections and advance his business interests. What can you offer him except housekeeping and cooking? I can offer him love, Sarah said simply. And, apparently, that's what he wants. Love, Victoria scoffed. How naive can you be? This isn't about love, Sarah. This is about that ridiculous deadline in his grandfather's will. Jake is desperate, and you're convenient. Don't you see that? Sarah felt a flicker of doubt, but she pushed it away. She had seen the love in Jake's eyes, felt it in his kisses. What they had was real. You're wrong, Sarah said firmly. Jake loves me, and I love him. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. Wake up, Sarah. Men like Jake don't marry women like you for love. They marry them for convenience and, then, find their real companionship elsewhere. Once the deadline passes and the ranch is safe, how long do you think it will be before Jake realizes what a mistake he's made? I think you should leave, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the hurt Victoria's words were causing. I'm trying to help you, Victoria said, her tone becoming almost pitying. Don't you see? You're setting yourself up for heartbreak. Jake will keep you around for a while because he's too much of a gentleman to divorce you immediately. But, eventually, he'll want a real wife, someone who fits into his world. Before Sarah could respond, Jake's voice came from the doorway. I think you've said enough, Victoria. Victoria turned to face him, and her expression immediately softened. Jake, thank goodness. I was just trying to talk some sense into your little housekeeper. Surely you can't be serious about marrying her. Jake walked over and put his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Sarah is going to be my wife, and I'd appreciate it if you treat her with respect." "Jake, be reasonable," Victoria pleaded. "You're about to make the biggest mistake of your life. This girl is completely wrong for you. She can't give you the kind of life you deserve." "The kind of life I deserve is the kind of life I choose," Jake said firmly. "And I choose Sarah. I choose love over social connections, happiness over business advantages, and a real partnership over empty sophistication." Victoria's mask of composure finally slipped completely. "You're going to regret this, Jake Blackwood. When you're stuck on this godforsaken ranch with your little nobody wife, don't come crying to me about the opportunities you've missed." "I won't," Jake said simply. "Because I'll be too busy being happy." Victoria looked back and forth between Jake and Sarah, clearly realizing that she had lost. Without another word, she stalked out of the house and drove away in her expensive car, leaving nothing but tire tracks in the snow. Jake pulled Sarah into his arms. "Are you okay?" "I heard some of what she said." Sarah nodded, though Victoria's words still stung. "She thinks you're only marrying me because of the deadline. She thinks you'll regret it once the ranch is safe." Jake cupped Sarah's face in his hands. "Sarah, look at me. Victoria is wrong about everything. Yes, the deadline forced me to speak up about my feelings sooner than I might have otherwise. But my feelings for you are real. They have nothing to do with the ranch or convenience or desperation." "How can you be sure?" Sarah asked, voicing the doubt that Victoria had planted. "Because I was already thinking about asking you to marry me before I told you about the deadline," Jake said. "I just didn't know how to bring it up or if you would say yes. The will just gave me the courage to take the risk." Sarah searched his eyes and saw nothing but love and sincerity. "I believe you," she said. "I love you too much not to." "Good," Jake said, kissing her softly. "Because in 10 days, you're going to be Mrs. Jake Blackwood, and I plan to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you made the right choice." The wedding day arrived with clear skies and fresh snow that made the entire ranch look like a winter wonderland. Sarah stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, putting the finishing touches on her appearance. Her simple white dress was perfect for the occasion, and she had worn her hair down the way Jake liked it. There was a knock on her door, and Tom's wife, Maria, peeked in. Maria had become a good friend over the past few months, and she had volunteered to help Sarah get ready. "You look beautiful," Maria said with a warm smile. "Jake is the luckiest man in Montana." Sarah took a deep breath. "I can't believe this is really happening." "Believe it," Maria said. "And stop worrying about whether you're good enough for him. Anyone with eyes can see that you two are perfect for each other." Downstairs, the living room had been transformed with white flowers and candles. The fireplace was crackling with warmth, and the afternoon light streaming through the windows made everything glow. It was simple but beautiful, exactly what Sarah had wanted. Jake stood at the front of the room with the minister, wearing his best suit and looking more handsome than Sarah had ever seen him. When she appeared at the top of the stairs, his face lit up with pure joy. As Sarah walked down the stairs toward her future husband, she felt a sense of completeness that she had never experienced before. She had spent her whole life looking for a place to belong, and she had finally found it here with Jake on this beautiful ranch. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, but Jake had also written his own words that made Sarah cry happy tears. "Sarah," he said, "you came into my life when I needed you most, and you've given me something I didn't even know I was missing. You've turned this house into a home and my life into something worth celebrating. I promise to love you, cherish you, and stand by you for all the days of my life." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jake kissed Sarah with such tenderness and love that there wasn't a dry eye in the room. As their friends applauded and cheered, Sarah knew that she had finally found her home. The reception was perfect, good food, warm company, and endless love and laughter. As the evening wound down and their guests began to leave, Jake and Sarah found themselves alone in the living room where they had just been married. "So, Mrs. Blackwood," Jake said, pulling her into his arms. "How does it feel to be a rancher's wife?" Sarah smiled up at him. "It feels like coming home. Even though you'll be stuck on this godforsaken ranch with your nobody husband?" Jake teased, echoing Victoria's parting words. Sarah laughed. "Especially because of that. Jake, I need you to know something. Even if there had been no deadline, even if the ranch had never been in danger, I would still have said yes. I didn't fall in love with the ranch owner. I fell in love with the man." Jake kissed her again, long and sweet. "I love you too, Sarah Blackwood. Forever and always." As they danced slowly to the music playing softly from the radio, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had needed a home, and Jake had needed an heir to secure his inheritance. But what they had found together was so much more than either of them had been looking for. They had found love, partnership, and the promise of a beautiful future together. Outside, snow continued to fall gently on the Blackwood Ranch, covering everything in pristine white. Inside, two people who had found their perfect match in each other began their new life together, surrounded by warmth, love, and the promise of many happy years to come. 3 months had passed since Sarah Martinez had arrived at the Blackwood Ranch, and the transformation was remarkable. The once chaotic kitchen now sparkled with cleanliness and organization. The entire house had a warm, welcoming feeling that it hadn't possessed in years. Sarah had not only met Jake's expectations but exceeded them in every way. Jake Blackwood stood in his kitchen on a crisp October morning, drinking coffee and watching Sarah prepare breakfast. She moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, scrambling eggs while bacon sizzled in another pan. The morning light streaming through the windows highlighted the copper in her dark hair, and Jake found himself noticing things about her that he probably shouldn't be noticing about his employee. "Breakfast is ready," Sarah announced, setting a plate in front of him at the kitchen island. "Smells fantastic," Jake said, as he did every morning. And it was true. Sarah's cooking was far better than anything Mrs. Henderson had ever made, though he would never say that out loud. But it wasn't just the food that had improved his life. The entire house felt different with Sarah in it. It felt like a home instead of just a place where he slept and ate. Sarah poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from him with her own plate. This had become their routine, sharing breakfast together before Jake headed out for his morning chores. At first, Sarah had been hesitant about eating with her employer, but Jake had insisted. He enjoyed her company and looked forward to their morning conversations. "Tom mentioned that you're expecting a cattle delivery today," Sarah said, cutting into her eggs. Jake nodded. 50 head from a ranch down in Wyoming. They should arrive around noon. I'll probably need to work late getting them settled and checked over. I'll make sure to have dinner ready whenever you're finished," Sarah said. "Maybe something that won't suffer if it has to wait." "You don't have to do that," Jake said, though he appreciated her thoughtfulness. "You could just leave something I can heat up later." Sarah shook her head. "I don't mind. Besides, I want to make sure you eat properly. You work too hard to skip meals." Jake felt that familiar warmth in his chest that seemed to happen whenever Sarah showed concern for his well-being. Over the past 3 months, she had become more than just an employee. She was someone who genuinely cared about him, and Jake couldn't remember the last time he'd had that in his life. After breakfast, Jake headed out to start his day while Sarah began her household routine. She had established systems for everything: laundry on certain days, deep cleaning on others, grocery shopping once a week in town. The house ran like clockwork now, but she always made it seem effortless. Around mid-morning, Sarah was dusting the living room when she heard a car pull up outside. She looked out the window and saw a sleek silver sedan that was obviously expensive and out of place on a working ranch. A woman got out of the car, and even from a distance, Sarah could tell she was beautiful and sophisticated. The woman was tall and elegant, with perfectly styled blonde hair and clothes that probably cost more than Sarah made in a month. She walked up to the front door with confidence and knocked firmly. Sarah opened the door and found herself face to face with one of the most beautiful women she had ever seen. The woman had piercing blue eyes, flawless makeup, and jewelry that caught the light as she moved. Hello, the woman said with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I'm looking for Jake Blackwood. I'm Victoria Hamilton. The name meant nothing to Sarah, but something about the woman's tone suggested she expected it to. Mr. Blackwood is out working with the cattle, Sarah said politely. I'm Sarah, the housekeeper. Can I help you with something? Victoria's eyes swept over Sarah, taking in her simple clothes and practical ponytail. Oh, the help, she said dismissively. Well, I'm an old friend of Jake's. A very close friend. I think I'll wait for him inside. Without waiting for an invitation, Victoria pushed past Sarah and walked into the living room. She looked around with obvious approval, though Sarah noticed her gaze lingering on the improvements that had been made to the house's comfort and appearance. This place looks different, Victoria commented. More domesticated. Sarah wasn't sure if that was a compliment or not. Can I offer you some coffee or tea while you wait? Coffee would be fine, Victoria said, settling herself on the leather sofa like she owned the place. Black, no sugar. Sarah went to the kitchen to prepare the coffee, her mind racing. There was something about Victoria Hamilton that put her on edge, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. Maybe it was the way she had dismissed Sarah as the help, or maybe it was the possessive way she had talked about Jake. When Sarah returned with the coffee, Victoria was examining the family photos on the mantelpiece. Jake's grandfather was quite handsome, she said. Strong genes in this family. Did you know his grandfather? Sarah asked, setting the coffee cup on a coaster near Victoria. Oh no, I never met the old man. But I've heard plenty about him. Jake used to talk about him all the time when we knew each other before. Victoria's tone suggested there was more to that story, but Sarah didn't feel comfortable asking. Instead, she said, I'll let Mr. Blackwood know you're here when he comes in for lunch. Actually, Victoria said, standing up, why don't I go find him myself? I know my way around the ranch. Before Sarah could respond, Victoria was heading for the door. Sarah watched through the window as the woman walked toward the barn in her high-heeled shoes, picking her way carefully across the uneven ground. About an hour later, Sarah heard voices approaching the house. She looked out and saw Jake walking back with Victoria, who was now holding onto his arm and laughing at something he had said. Jake's expression was harder to read, but he didn't look entirely comfortable. They came through the kitchen door, and Jake immediately looked for Sarah. Sarah, I'd like you to meet Victoria Hamilton. Victoria, this is Sarah Martinez, who keeps the ranch running smoothly. We've met, Victoria said with that same bright smile. She's been very helpful. Jake seemed to sense some tension in the air. Victoria is an old friend from college, he explained to Sarah. She's in town on business and decided to stop by. How wonderful, Sarah said, though she felt anything but wonderful about this development. I'll start lunch. Will Miss Hamilton be staying? Oh yes, Victoria said before Jake could answer. I'd love to catch up with Jake properly. It's been far too long. Sarah nodded and began preparing lunch, but she couldn't help overhearing the conversation from the kitchen island where Jake and Victoria had settled. This place looks amazing, Jake, Victoria was saying. So much more comfortable than it used to be. Your little housekeeper has quite the touch. Sarah has been wonderful, Jake agreed. She's transformed this place. I'm sure she has, Victoria said, and there was something in her tone that made Sarah look up sharply. Tell me, how long has she been working for you? About 3 months, Jake replied. Why? Just curious. It must be nice having a woman around the house again. I imagine it gets lonely out here all by yourself. Sarah could hear the leading quality in Victoria's voice, as if she was fishing for information. She focused on making sandwiches, trying not to eavesdrop, but it was impossible not to hear. I manage fine, Jake said simply. Of course you do, Victoria laughed. You always were so self-sufficient. But, still, a man needs companionship. The right kind of companionship. Sarah felt her cheeks heat up at the implications in Victoria's words. She finished making the sandwiches and brought them to the island, along with some of the potato salad she had made the day before. "This looks delicious," Jake said, giving Sarah a grateful smile. "Victoria, you're in for a treat. Sarah is an excellent cook." Victoria took a small bite of her sandwich. Very good. Simple, but tasty." Again, Sarah wasn't sure if she was being complimented or insulted. She excused herself to do some cleaning upstairs, wanting to get away from Victoria's penetrating gaze and leading comments. From upstairs, Sarah could hear the murmur of voices but not the words. Whatever Jake and Victoria were discussing, it seemed to be a long conversation. Sarah tried to focus on her work, but she found herself straining to listen despite her better judgment. After about an hour, she heard Victoria's laughter ring out, followed by the sound of the front door closing. Sarah looked out the upstairs window and saw Victoria walking to her car. But, instead of leaving immediately, she turned back to Jake, who had followed her outside. Sarah watched as Victoria stood very close to Jake, her hand on his chest, talking earnestly about something. Then, to Sarah's shock, Victoria reached up and kissed Jake. It wasn't a friendly peck on the cheek, but a full kiss on the lips that lasted several seconds. When they broke apart, Victoria said something that made Jake step back slightly, but Sarah couldn't hear what it was from her position at the window. Victoria got in her car and drove away, leaving Jake standing alone in the driveway. He stood there for a long moment before walking slowly back to the house. Sarah quickly moved away from the window, not wanting to be caught watching. She busied herself with folding laundry, but her mind was spinning. Who was Victoria Hamilton, really? What was her relationship with Jake? And why did Sarah feel like someone had punched her in the stomach when she saw that kiss? Jake came back into the house and called up the stairs. "Sarah? Could I talk to you for a minute?" Coming, Sarah called back, trying to make her voice sound normal. She went downstairs and found Jake in the kitchen, looking somewhat uncomfortable. "I wanted to explain about Victoria," Jake said without preamble. "We dated in college, and we stayed in touch for a while after graduation. But that was a long time ago." Sarah tried to keep her expression neutral. "You don't need to explain anything to me, Mr. Blackwood. Your personal life is your own business." "Jake," he corrected automatically. "You've been calling me Jake for months now. And I know I don't need to explain, but I want to. Victoria has a tendency to give the wrong impression about our relationship." "I see," Sarah said, though she wasn't sure she did. Jake ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Sarah had learned meant he was frustrated or uncomfortable. "The truth is, Victoria and I dated for about 6 months in our senior year of college. She had very specific ideas about what her life should look like after graduation. When she found out I was planning to come back to the ranch instead of pursuing a career in the city, she ended things pretty quickly." "That must have been difficult," Sarah said, surprised by how much she wanted to comfort him. "It was at the time," Jake admitted. "But, looking back, I realize we weren't right for each other. We wanted completely different things. She's a successful businesswoman now, lives in Denver, deals in real estate investments. She's built exactly the life she always wanted. And she's beautiful," Sarah said before she could stop herself. Jake looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Yes, she is. But beauty isn't everything, Sarah. Victoria and we never really understood each other. Not the way two people should if they're going to build a life together." There was something in his voice that made Sarah's heart skip a beat, but she pushed the feeling down. Jake was her employer, and she couldn't afford to complicate that relationship with inappropriate feelings. "Well," she said, trying to keep her tone light, "I should probably get back to work. The cattle truck should be arriving soon, and you'll want to be ready for them." "Sarah," Jake said, stopping her as she turned to leave. "Victoria mentioned that she might be back in the area again soon. If she stops by when I'm not here, you don't have to entertain her or anything. Just let her know when I'll be back." "Of course," Sarah said. But privately, she hoped Victoria Hamilton would stay far away from the Blackwood Ranch. The cattle delivery went smoothly, and Jake was busy for the rest of the day getting the new animals settled and integrated with the existing herd. Sarah had dinner ready when he finally came in around 9 o'clock, tired and dusty but satisfied with the day's work. "You didn't have to wait up," Jake said as he washed his hands at the kitchen sink. "I know you had a long day too." "I wanted to make sure everything went well with the cattle," Sarah said, setting a plate in front of him. "Besides, I enjoy our dinner conversations." Jake smiled at her as he sat down. "So do I. More than you know." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, both of them tired from their respective days. But Sarah could sense that Jake had something on his mind. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said finally. "Sure. What did you think of Victoria?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "She seems like a very confident, successful woman. I can see why you dated her." "That's not what I asked," Jake said gently. "What did you think of her?" Sarah met his eyes across the table. "Honestly? I think she's the kind of woman who's used to getting what she wants. And I think she still wants you." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "Yeah," he said finally. "I got that impression too." "Is that a problem?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. "It could be," Jake said. "Victoria doesn't take no for an answer easily. When she wants something, she can be very persistent." "And what does she want?" Jake looked directly at Sarah, and she saw something in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. "She wants me to sell the ranch and move to Denver. She has some business opportunity she thinks would be perfect for me. She also made it pretty clear that she'd be interested in picking up where we left off." Sarah felt that punch in the stomach feeling again. "And what do you want?" "I want to keep the ranch," Jake said firmly. "This is my home, my family's legacy. I could never sell it. As for the rest..." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Let's just say that ship has sailed. Victoria and I are different people who want different things. We always were." Sarah felt relief wash over her, though she tried not to show it. "I'm glad," she said. "I mean, I'm glad you're keeping the ranch. It would be terrible to see it sold." "Would you miss it?" Jake asked. "If I sold the ranch and you had to find another job?" The question caught Sarah off guard. Would she miss it? She would miss everything about this place, the peaceful mornings, the beautiful landscape, the sense of belonging she had found here. But, most of all, she realized, she would miss Jake. "Yes," she said simply. "I would miss it very much." Jake reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "I'm glad you're here, Sarah. I hope you know that." The touch of his hand sent warmth shooting through Sarah's entire body. She looked down at their joined hands and felt something shift between them. This wasn't just an employer being kind to an employee. This was something more, something that scared and thrilled her at the same time. "I'm glad I'm here too," she said softly. They sat like that for a moment, hands touching, both of them aware that something had changed between them. Then, Jake slowly pulled his hand back, and the spell was broken. "I should let you get some rest," Jake said, standing up. "Tomorrow's another busy day." Sarah nodded and began clearing the dishes. As Jake headed toward the stairs, he turned back. "Sarah? Thank you. For everything. For making this place feel like home again." After he went upstairs, Sarah stood in the kitchen thinking about his words. She had made the ranch feel like home for Jake. But what she hadn't expected was how much it had become home for her too. For the first time in her life, she felt like she truly belonged somewhere. But Victoria Hamilton's visit had reminded her of something important. Sarah was just the housekeeper. Jake was the wealthy ranch owner. Women like Victoria, beautiful, sophisticated, successful women, were the kind of women who ended up with men like Jake. Women like Sarah just worked for them. Still, as she finished cleaning the kitchen and headed to her own room, Sarah couldn't forget the way Jake had looked at her, or the warmth of his hand covering hers. Maybe she was just the housekeeper, but tonight, she had felt like something more. Sarah Martinez clutched her worn leather purse tighter as she walked down Main Street in Cedar Ridge, Montana. The small town looked like something from a postcard, with its wide streets and old-fashioned storefronts. But Sarah wasn't here to admire the scenery. She was running out of options, and this place might be her last chance. The letter in her purse had arrived 3 weeks ago. It was from a lawyer in Cedar Ridge, telling her about a job opening at the Blackwood Ranch. The position was for a live-in housekeeper and cook. What caught her attention wasn't just the good pay, but the fact that housing was included. Sarah desperately needed both. At 28, Sarah had been through more hardships than most people twice her age. She had grown up in foster care after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. She had bounced from home to home, never finding a place where she truly belonged. When she turned 18, she was on her own with nothing but a high school diploma and a fierce determination to make something of herself. For the past 10 years, Sarah had worked various jobs to support herself. She had been a waitress, a store clerk, a cleaning lady, and even worked in a factory for a while. But 6 months ago, everything fell apart. The restaurant where she worked as a manager suddenly closed down. The owner had disappeared with most of the money, leaving all the employees without jobs or their final paychecks. Sarah had tried to find another job, but the small city where she lived didn't have many opportunities. Her savings ran out quickly, and soon she couldn't afford her rent. She had been staying at a women's shelter for the past month, but she knew she couldn't stay there forever. That's when the letter about the ranch job arrived. The Blackwood Ranch was owned by Jake Blackwood, a man Sarah had never met. According to the lawyer's letter, Jake was 35 years old and had inherited the ranch from his grandfather 2 years ago. The ranch was successful, raising cattle and horses, but Jake needed help managing the house. His previous housekeeper had retired, and he was looking for someone reliable and hardworking. Sarah had called the lawyer immediately and set up an interview. She used the last of her money to buy a bus ticket to Montana. It was a risk, but she had no other choice. If she didn't get this job, she didn't know what she would do next. The bus ride to Cedar Ridge had taken 2 days. Sarah spent most of the time staring out the window at the changing landscape. As they got closer to Montana, the land became more open and wild. There were endless fields, rolling hills, and mountains in the distance. It was beautiful, but also a little scary for someone who had spent her whole life in cities and towns. Now, walking down Main Street, Sarah looked for the address the lawyer had given her. She was supposed to meet Jake Blackwood at his lawyer's office before going out to the ranch. Sarah checked her watch. She was 15 minutes early, which was perfect. She always liked to be on time for important meetings. The lawyer's office was in a small building between a hardware store and a diner. Sarah took a deep breath and pushed open the door. A bell rang as she entered, and a middle-aged woman behind a desk looked up and smiled. "You must be Sarah Martinez," the woman said. "I'm Helen, Mr. Peterson's secretary. He's expecting you." Sarah nodded and smoothed down her best dress. It wasn't much, but it was clean and professional looking. She had bought it at a thrift store years ago for job interviews. "Mr. Blackwood is already here," Helen continued. "I'll let them know you've arrived." A few minutes later, a man in his 60s came out of an inner office, followed by another man who made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Jake Blackwood was tall, probably 6 feet 2 inches, with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin that spoke of years working outdoors. His dark brown hair was slightly messy, and he had kind eyes that were the color of coffee. "Miss Martinez," the older man said, extending his hand. "I'm Robert Peterson, Jake's lawyer. Thank you for coming all this way." Sarah shook his hand and then turned to Jake. When their eyes met, she felt a strange flutter in her stomach. Jake's handshake was firm and warm, and his smile seemed genuine. "It's nice to meet you, Miss Martinez," Jake said. His voice was deep and had a slight Western accent. "I appreciate you making the trip. I know it's not easy to travel so far for a job interview." "Please, call me Sarah," she said, surprised by how nervous she suddenly felt. And thank you for considering me for the position." The three of them went into Mr. Peterson's office, and Sarah found herself sitting across from Jake at a large wooden desk. Mr. Peterson sat behind the desk and opened a folder. "Let's start with the basics," Mr. Peterson said. "Sarah, can you tell us about your experience with housekeeping and cooking?" Sarah had prepared for this question. "I've been taking care of myself since I was 18, so I know how to clean and organize a house. I'm also a good cook. I learned by necessity at first, but I discovered I really enjoy it. At my last job managing a restaurant, I sometimes helped in the kitchen during busy times." Jake leaned forward slightly. "The ranch house is pretty big. It has 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a large kitchen, and several common areas. Are you comfortable with managing a house that size?" "I think so," Sarah said honestly. "I'm not afraid of hard work, and I'm very organized. I would need some time to learn your preferences and routines, but I'm a fast learner." "What about cooking?" Jake asked. "I'm not looking for anything fancy, just good, hearty meals. I usually eat breakfast early, around 6 in the morning, and dinner around 7 at night. Lunch is usually something simple since I'm often working outside." Sarah nodded. "I can definitely handle that. I enjoy cooking, and I'm good at planning meals and managing a kitchen. Do you have any dietary restrictions or foods you particularly like or dislike?" Jake smiled, and Sarah noticed how it changed his whole face, making him look younger and more approachable. "I'm pretty easy to please. I like meat and potatoes, but I also appreciate vegetables and variety. My grandfather used to say that good food makes everything better." Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. "Now, let's discuss the practical aspects. Sarah, the job includes room and board. You would have your own bedroom and bathroom in the main house, plus full access to the kitchen and common areas. The salary is $1,500 a week, paid every Friday." Sarah's eyes widened. That was more money than she had ever made in her life. "That's very generous," she managed to say. "The ranch does well," Jake said simply. "And I believe in paying fairly for good work. The job isn't just housekeeping and cooking, though. Sometimes I might need help with paperwork or answering the phone. And, during busy times, like when we're branding cattle or bringing in hay, I might ask you to help prepare meals for the extra workers we hire." "I can handle that," Sarah said quickly. "I'm comfortable with office work, and I've cooked for large groups before." Mr. Peterson looked at his notes. "There are a few other things to discuss. Sarah, this is a live-in position, which means you'll be on the ranch property most of the time. The nearest town is Cedar Ridge, which is about 20 minutes away by car. Do you drive?" Sarah's heart sank a little. "I have a driver's license, but I don't have a car right now." Jake waved his hand dismissively. "That's not a problem. The ranch has several vehicles. You're welcome to use the pickup truck whenever you need to go to town for groceries or personal errands." "Really?" Sarah asked, surprised by his generosity. "Of course," Jake said. "You'll need to be able to get around, especially for shopping and supplies. The truck isn't fancy, but it's reliable." Mr. Peterson continued reading from his notes. "The position is full-time, but you'll have Sundays off unless there's an emergency. You'll also get 2 weeks of paid vacation after working for 6 months." Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. This job seemed too good to be true. There had to be a catch somewhere. "Can I ask," she said carefully, "why you're offering such good terms? Most housekeeping jobs don't pay this well or include so many benefits." Jake was quiet for a moment, and Sarah saw something sad pass across his face. "My grandfather raised me after my parents died," he said finally. "He always told me that taking care of people who work hard for you isn't just good business, it's the right thing to do. Besides, the ranch is isolated. It's fair to compensate someone well for giving up the convenience of living in town." Sarah felt a connection to Jake's story about losing his parents, though she didn't say anything about her own similar experience. Instead, she asked, how long has it been since you've had a housekeeper? About 3 months, Jake admitted. Mrs. Henderson worked for my grandfather for 20 years and stayed on after he passed. But she's 75 now and wanted to move closer to her daughter in California. I've been managing on my own since she left, but I'm not very good at keeping house. Mr. Peterson chuckled. That's an understatement. Jake, your kitchen looks like a tornado hit it every time I stop by. Jake had the grace to look embarrassed. I can cook basic things, but I'm not very organized about cleaning up. And I definitely can't keep up with laundry and all the other household tasks. Running the ranch takes most of my time and energy. Sarah found his honesty refreshing. Many employers try to make themselves look perfect during interviews. What does running the ranch involve exactly? We have about 500 head of cattle and 50 horses, Jake explained. I have 4 full-time ranch hands who help with the daily work. During certain times of the year, like spring branding or fall roundup, I hire additional temporary workers. Most days, I'm up before dawn checking on the animals, repairing fences, maintaining equipment, or handling business matters. It sounds like hard work, Sarah said. It is, but I love it, Jake said, and Sarah could see the passion in his eyes. This ranch has been in my family for 3 generations. My great-grandfather started it with nothing but determination and a dream. I want to keep that legacy going. Mr. Peterson looked at his watch. Jake, why don't you take Sarah out to see the ranch? That way she can get a feel for the place and decide if it's right for her. Jake stood up and reached for his hat, a well-worn cowboy hat that looked like it had seen many years of use. That's a good idea. Sarah, are you ready for a little tour? Sarah stood as well, smoothing down her dress. I'd love to see it. They thanked Mr. Peterson and walked outside. Jake's pickup truck was parked right in front of the office. It was an older model, probably 10 or 15 years old, but it looked well maintained. Jake opened the passenger door for her, which Sarah thought was nice. Not many men had good manners these days. As they drove out of town, Jake pointed out various landmarks. That's the feed store where I buy supplies, he said, indicating a large building with several trucks parked outside. And that's Miller's Grocery, where Mrs. Henderson always shopped. They have good meat and produce, and they know the ranch account. The landscape outside town was even more beautiful than Sarah had imagined. Rolling hills stretched in every direction, covered with grass that moved like waves in the wind. Cattle dotted the fields, and she could see mountains rising in the distance. How much land does the ranch cover? Sarah asked. About 12,000 acres, Jake said. Some of it is pasture for the cattle, some is hayfields, and some is just open range. My grandfather believed in letting the land stay as natural as possible while still using it productively. They drove for about 20 minutes on a gravel road before Sarah saw the ranch buildings in the distance. The main house was a large, 2-story structure made of logs and stone. It looked rustic but well-built, with a wide front porch and several large windows. Near the house were a barn, several smaller outbuildings, and what looked like bunkhouses for the ranch workers. It's beautiful, Sarah said, meaning it. The whole place had a feeling of permanence and belonging that she had never experienced before. Jake parked near the front porch and they got out. As they walked toward the house, a dog came running up to them. It was a medium-sized mutt with golden fur and intelligent eyes. The dog went straight to Jake, tail wagging, but then came over to sniff Sarah curiously. This is Ranger, Jake said, scratching the dog behind the ears. He's friendly, but he's also a good watchdog. Don't worry if he follows you around at first. He just wants to get to know you. Sarah bent down and let Ranger sniff her hand, then gently petted his head. She had always loved animals, though she had never been able to have pets in her various living situations. Jake led her up the porch steps and opened the front door. Welcome to the Blackwood Ranch, he said. The inside of the house took Sarah's breath away. The front door opened into a large living room with high ceilings, exposed wooden beams, and a massive stone fireplace. The furniture was comfortable looking but masculine, with leather sofas and heavy wooden tables. Large windows let in plenty of natural light and offered views of the surrounding countryside. "This is the main living area," Jake said. "I spend most of my time here when I'm in the house. The kitchen is through that doorway." Sarah followed him into the kitchen and immediately understood what Mr. Peterson had meant about it looking like a tornado hit it. The kitchen itself was wonderful, large and well equipped with modern appliances, plenty of counter space, and a big island in the center. But there were dirty dishes in the sink, papers scattered on the counters, and what looked like the remains of several meals that hadn't been properly cleaned up. Jake looked around with obvious embarrassment. "I know it's a mess. I keep meaning to clean it up properly, but I just use what I need and move on to the next task." "It's not that bad," Sarah said diplomatically, though privately she was already mentally organizing how she would tackle the cleaning. "It just needs some attention and a good system for keeping it organized." They continued the tour through the dining room, which had a large wooden table that could easily seat 12 people. Jake explained that it was used when they had large groups for meals during busy ranch times. Upstairs, he showed her 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. The master bedroom was obviously his, with clothes thrown over chairs and more papers scattered on the dresser. "This would be your room," Jake said, opening the door to a bedroom at the end of the hall. Sarah stepped inside and felt her heart lift. The room was beautiful, with large windows that looked out over the pastures. There was a double bed with a colorful quilt, a dresser, a comfortable chair, and even a small desk. The attached bathroom was clean and modern. "It's perfect," Sarah said, and she meant it. She had never had such a nice room of her own. Jake seemed pleased by her reaction. "Mrs. Henderson decorated it. She said every woman needs a space that feels like home." They went back downstairs and out to see the rest of the ranch buildings. Jake introduced her to 2 of his ranch hands, Carlos and Tom, who were working in the barn. Both men were polite and friendly, and Sarah got the impression that Jake was a good boss who treated his employees well. As they walked around the property, Jake explained more about the ranch operations. He talked about the seasonal rhythms of ranch life, the challenges of raising cattle and horses, and his plans for improving and expanding the operation. Sarah could see how much he loved what he did, and his enthusiasm was infectious. "There's one more thing I should probably mention," Jake said as they headed back toward the house. "The ranch can be pretty isolated, especially in winter. Some people find it lonely out here." Sarah looked around at the wide open spaces, the mountains in the distance, and the peaceful quiet that was broken only by the sound of wind and the occasional call of a bird. "I think I'd like the peace and quiet," she said. "I've spent most of my life in crowded, noisy places. This feels calm." Jake smiled at her response. "That's how I feel about it too. Some people need the energy of the city, but I've always found peace in wide open spaces." They sat on the front porch for a while, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Ranger had settled down at Jake's feet, and Sarah could hear cattle lowing in the distance. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said after a while. "Of course. Why are you really looking for this job? I mean, you're obviously intelligent and capable. You could probably find work in a city that pays well. Why come all the way out here to cook and clean for a rancher you've never met?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, deciding how much to tell him. She had learned to be careful about sharing too much of her story too quickly. People often treated her differently when they learned about her background. "I need a fresh start," she said finally. "The last few months have been difficult, and I'm looking for stability and a place where I can build something positive." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "I can understand that. Sometimes life throws you curves you don't expect, and you have to find a way to start over." There was something in his voice that made Sarah think he was speaking from experience, but she didn't pry. Everyone had their own stories and their own reasons for the choices they made. "So," Jake said, "what do you think? Are you interested in the job?" Sarah looked around at the beautiful ranch, thought about the comfortable room that could be hers, and considered the opportunity to build a stable life in this peaceful place. Yes, she said without hesitation. I'm very interested. When could you start? Jake asked. Whenever you need me to, Sarah replied. I don't have anything holding me back where I came from. Jake stood up and extended his hand. Then, welcome to the Blackwood Ranch, Sarah Martinez. I have a feeling this is going to work out well for both of us. As Sarah shook his hand, she felt a spark of hope that she hadn't experienced in months. Maybe, just maybe, she had finally found a place where she could belong.